guys, I'm here with my friend James.
What's up?
James, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah,
Well, not me per se, but everybody.
so my name is James Warren, and me and Jess know each other from a small group that we're in together, a young adult group. And I live out here in San Diego, and I work at a church called Rise City Church as a student pastor and oversee the middle school and high school ministries there. And I'm excited for today's discussion and just to talk about meaningful and impactful things on this YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, so I know I had originally asked you like if you had any red button moments in life, but also for this channel, I just really want to kind of touch on things that tug at people's heartstrings. So when I asked you about that, you told me about a situation back in your high school years where a friend had actually taken his own life. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. And so, I remember that, that discussion we had when you came up to me and asked me if there's a red button topic, if there's something that has happened to me that has been a bad experience, but that I've grown from so much to where I wouldn't go back and change things.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you then, and I'd say it again now, that what I'm about to talk about is not, by definition, a red button topic. If I could go back and change the fact that my close friend committed suicide, I would in a heartbeat. And I think anybody who's experienced a loved one who has ended their life would agree that no matter how much you grow or see other people grow from going through a bad experience, all of us would go back and change something as terrible as that. And so while this isn't necessarily a red button topic where I would go back and change it, it is a topic where I can talk about where it's been a deep, painful situation, but there's still been ways that I may have grown or God has used it in my life, and so we can talk about it in that way. And so the topic that we talked about was I had a really close friend in high school when I was a sophomore who ended his life. His name is Ryan, and we met each other in between my freshman and sophomore year. And so leading up to that point, just to give you a little bit of context, when I went to middle school, then I was surrounded by like a ton of my best friends. Even to this day, they're still some of my closest friends from middle school, which is kind of weird. Most people don't have like close friends from middle school, but we were like a really tight community, not only at school.
Like Facebook friends with them.
Yeah, right. So I'm not talking about everybody, but like there's like 2 or 3 that I'm still really close with today.
That's awesome.
And but it was largely because the middle school friends were also in my friend group at church. And so they were all kind of like really close friends, middle school church friends. But then going into high school, I got redistricted to a different high school. And it's maybe weird for people out here in California if you're listening to this, but in Illinois, you have to go to whatever school your district tells you go to. And so there's literally a map and a line drawn down the map saying if you live in this part of town, you go to this school. If you live on this side of town, you go to the other school. And in order to change schools, you have to do a lot of paperwork and maybe even doctor's notes and all kinds of stuff in order to get to a different school. And so anyways, all that to say, I got redistricted to a different high school where I didn't know anyone, nobody from church, nobody from school, completely didn't know anybody. And so I got pushed over to this school, and my freshman year, that was pretty tough, as you can imagine, just not knowing anybody. And not only was it the fact that I didn't know anybody at my new high school, but also that everybody I did know got to go to the same high school and continue their friendships and grow in their relationships, while I was kind of left out of that a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty hard, especially like as a high school kid. That's like your whole life. Your social life with your friends is everything.
Right.
And
did you ever make any like solid friends?
Yeah, later on, it really wasn't until my junior and senior year where I really began to make better friendships that I still have to this day.
Okay.
But yeah, freshman and sophomore year was just not really that case. That wasn't really the case. So going into my sophomore year, I remember being at a summer camp for church, and it was like a 5-day CIY summer camp type deal. And I remember sitting there during one of the devotional times and just praying to God, asking him to give me somebody that I could just be close friends with. There's somebody that we could just hang out, have a good time, be bros, whatever.
Yeah.
And just asking God that he would give me somebody in my life where, we could just, at least just one person, maybe several people, there's a community to be with, which we all desperately need, friendships and community. And a place where we feel like we belong and people we can trust.
Absolutely. Especially in high school.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
there's-
So
When you feel like there's so much pressure
yeah.
to like fit in and be accepted, and yeah.
Yeah, and so with that context, I was just praying to God that He would, give me somebody. And by the end of the week, I'd actually met a guy named Ryan, who was a year older than me at the time, but we just kind of hit it off at camp. And the whole week, just from like conversations at 3 a.m. or pranks that he would pull on people or just the different activities, like we just started to connect in a lot of small ways.
Mm-hmm.
But then by the time we got back from camp, we were like really, really close.
Okay, so you really feel like Ryan was an answer to your prayer.
Yeah, for sure. And so we got back, and I had not had my license at the time. I was still just 15, but he was a year older, like I said, so he had his license. And it's kind of that time in high school where you start to get a little bit more freedom when you get your license. And again, it's kind of a cultural difference out here because in California, I feel like people are a little bit more slow to get their license, a little bit more slow to get a car. But in Illinois, there is nothing to do. And so the second you get your license and can have a little bit of freedom to just do something, even if it's just driving around the cornfields, it's a big deal. And so as soon as you turn 16,
Washington, it's the same way.
So as soon as you turn 16, you are in line at the DMV getting your license. And so to have a friend who had his license, they could come and pick me up and we could go and do things. Like, it was kind of the first friendship that I had where I began to have freedom to really have it grow on its own and not be like, hey mom, can you drop me off at so-and-so's house and all that kind of stuff. Like, we would go and pretty much every day, either before or after work or after football practice or 2 days throughout the summer, we were hanging out, going over to each other's houses, doing all the things that high school guys do and just growing that friendship. Fast forward about, 5 months until November is where everything, took a turn for the worst. And as we talked about before, on November 8th, 2012 is when my friend Ryan ended up committing suicide and ending his own life. And
at what? But we had spoken before, and you had mentioned that he did tell you that he was struggling, or that he had previously struggled mentally. At what point in your friendship did he come out and say, like, I had previously attempted suicide?
Yeah, so what you guys need to know about Ryan is he was the most just loving kid you can imagine. And I know everybody says that, especially, at funerals and memories of people. But he really was like the most, like, I've never had a friendship of a guy who would call me just say like, I love you, man.
Aww.
And like every day it was like, hey man, I love you. What are you doing today? Cool. Come over and let's hang out. Like, and just all of these like ways he would just express like just laughter and joy to be around. Yeah. And so he was just like the most loving, kid you could imagine. And so there was a time where he actually did open up to me and told me about how in his past, about a year ago, before he had met me or anything like that, or before he had really come to know Christ, or before he, just at a different period in his life, that he had struggled with suicidal thoughts. And he had told me about a time where he had considered taking his own life and had the plan in place and all of that kind of stuff. And after that conversation, we cried together, and I told him like how glad I am that he didn't go through with it, and how incredible his life is now, and how much God is using him now and his future and all that kind of stuff, as anyone would. If a friend tells you about something like that, like, you're just there for them in those moments. But to me at the time, it was all something that was dealt with and moved on from.
Okay.
And so it was before he had known Christ. It was before he had come into the community of people that he was in that point. It was kind of like a 180-degree change in his life, where he was kind of put all of that behind him and moved on. Okay. And that was kind of my understanding. And obviously, unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and that part of that was still haunted him in the midst of our friendship.
Okay. So then November 7th or 8th?
November 8th is when everything went down.
Okay. And what happened, like, leading up to that?
Yeah, so basically there was an incident the day before where Ryan had gotten into some sort of trouble at school, just messing around as a high school kid, and had gotten...
As we all did.
Yeah, and so he had gotten called into the office and sent home, and all of a sudden, like, the devil just began to use his I guess, view on how this is going to affect his life. just for the worst, and that I'm sure just going through his head things like, you are not going to be forgiven from this, everybody's going to judge you for this, you're going to get kicked out of high school, you're not going to be able to go to college, you're not going to be able to, you know, make new friends, you're going to be kicked out of any friend group that you have, you're going to, you know, just all of these things probably just taken for the worst. And as a high schooler, you lack the ability, and as a high school pastor, I've learned this even more, that as a high school student, you lack the ability to be able to think through long-term consequences. And so you either don't think through them, or a lot of times you might overthink them, and in a way that they're not accurate. And so the discernment.
Does that have to do with like relativity, like from like where your age in life and like what you've experienced being so limited, or what do you think?
It can. It's part of it is just part of growing up. And so there's a reason that you're not supposed to drink until you're 21. There's a reason you're not supposed to drive until you're 16. It's because your brain is still developing.
Yeah.
And it's not like, part of it is like, if you drink too much when you're younger, it can make your brain less functional to a point where it's not going to develop. But also just because you're not able to think through the different consequences that can take place. And I think it's not even until you're 25 when your brain is fully developed.
Males.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well maybe girls, yeah, whatever.
We develop early.
But all that to say, like, yeah, your brain just isn't fully developed. But at the same time, there's also things that can happen in a person's life that can delay the development of certain things. And so if you are being raised in an environment that is not healthy, whether it be, you know, abuse or different experiences that you've had, then it's going to delay your cognitive ability of development, and the ability to process emotions, and all of that is going to be delayed. And so I even know and work with teenagers whose emotional level, you know, they might be 18, 17, but their emotional cognitive development might be more of like a 14 or 15-year-old or something like that. And so there's definitely things that happen that can delay it. But even for anyone, like, I don't care who you are, if you're 16, 17, like, your ability to think through long-term consequences on just a very basic level may not be fully developed. And you can, like, you're still smart. I'm not calling anybody watching this that's 16 stupid. Like, you guys are intelligent and smart, and you can think through, you can be wise.
Just the way the brain develops and functions.
So even today, like, I was going through, I hit up a friend from high school this morning, and he had posted on his Facebook, like, you know, I'm bored during quarantine. If we were friends a long time ago, hit me up and we'll catch up. And so I sent him a message, but when I sent him the message, I had scrolled up and saw previous conversations we had when I was in high school, and I was like, man, like, this, I was such an idiot. And so,
yeah, I think, you know, looking back, we all feel that way about certain decisions. And I mean, to be honest, like, not even high school, like, was I ridiculous on Facebook, because I didn't come onto Facebook until like 2010. So I was definitely using it more as like a diary, so to speak. And I would just say things that I read now, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So like, I wonder what I was thinking. But back to like the emotional stunting, like, that can also, drinking can also cause that. So from a drug and alcohol counselor's standpoint, like, you will be emotionally stunted at whatever age you start drinking at, as long as you continue drinking and don't ever emotionally develop. Just an interesting fact. But back to your story. So so he had all of, most likely, all of these accumulating thoughts that just sent him down a negative path and spiraled out of control until he ended up taking his own life, right?
Yeah, so again, like, this is something that I have always wrestled with and wondered, like, you know, what was going through his head? How could he do this?
Yeah. Did he leave a note or anything?
And what?
Did he leave a note or anything?
No.
Okay.
And so it was just tough, and like trying to think through, like, how could he do this? Like, he knew that we loved him so much, knew that God loved him so much, like, what was going through his head? And that's something that I just don't know. And anybody who's been on the other side of suicide, where their pain has now been passed on to you, it's kind of that question that everybody wrestles with, of like, how could this happen? Why would they do this? And I think really the only answer that I have is that mental illness comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and the devil would love to just use it more than anything to just interrupt any sort of plan or purpose that God would have for somebody.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the fact that it all happened, I don't think there's anything I can say to explain why it happened or what was going through his head. But I do know the character of the devil, and that is just to convince people that their brokenness is too much, and that the best option could be some sort of self-harm, could be some sort of, you know, pushing people away, and in the worst case, suicide.
Yeah. So, okay, so like I have never experienced personally like a friend or anybody close actually taking their own life. The closest thing I've come is my daughter actually had a friend who was struggling with some of those thoughts, and she kind of came to me with some questions, and I mean I did the best I could in like trying to help her support her friend and encourage her friend to kind of steer away from that. But like in my limited experience, fortunately her friend ended up going to counseling, and she's doing a lot better now. But like, what advice would you give me or anybody who might know somebody, or if somebody comes to them and says, hey, I used to struggle with suicidal thoughts, and you know, like now I'm fine, but do you have, like, what did you learn from that, and what could you possibly give me or anybody else?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, if you have relationships with people, there's probably somebody that you know and love that battles with some sort of mental illness, and it might not be suicide, hopefully not, but
can we clarify a little bit mental illness? Because it might not even be something like bipolar or something significant or even diagnosable, but a lot of times like anxiety can spiral out of control, or little things like people just really have a hard time capturing their thoughts and not letting them run away with themselves, right?
Yeah, and as Christ followers, you know, we're called to love others, and the way we love others a lot of times will create moments where other people will begin to open up and share things. And as you create relationships with people and build relationships with people, friendships, romantic relationships, like whatever, people are going to start to open up about things in their past, and more likely than not, there's something that they're anxious about, there's something that they may have been through, and it's just good, first of all, to just be somebody who listens well and loves well in those moments. And so a lot of times the best thing that you can do is start by just listening and let those people do the talking, ask follow-up questions, but really just be a good listener, and just continue to just love on those people. And so that's the first thing I would say. But also, knowing what I know now, if somebody were to open up to me about something that's a more serious issue that they have in the past struggled with, I would take that with a grain of salt, knowing that while they may have battled this in the past, it's probably not completely dealt with. It's probably not all the way worked through. There's probably a lot of it that is still haunting them or sticking with them, and maybe them opening up to you is a cry for help, or maybe it is something that is just a door that's being opened for you to be able to help out. And I'd say that's especially the case if they're coming to you like, hey, I haven't told anybody this before. Because that means that they haven't worked through this. That means they haven't been through counseling. That means that they haven't had other people that they've had worked through this. So if somebody's coming to you saying like, hey, I don't talk about this a lot, I haven't told anybody this, then one of the first things I would do is like, well, first of all, like, thank you for being brave enough to talk about this. And because just having the conversation is what needs to happen. You know, there's a stigma around all of this. There is the pressure to hide it and to push it deeper down and not to talk about it and just assume that you've moved on and that everything's in the past and that everything's, you know, worked out. But then something can happen and it can just bring everything back up. And so until you've been able to process it and talk with somebody about it, and especially I would encourage counseling and therapy to have professional help more than anything, because like there is a trained way to do things well and help that can be given that just an average friend can't give. And on the same hand, there's also help that can be given by a friend that a therapist can't give. There's just a different role that takes place. And so if you're battling with something very serious, then I would strongly encourage you to seek help in counseling, and also continue to open up to friends, to parents, to loved ones, and to just have the conversation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but like I said, like, I wouldn't take conversations like that. I would take it all with a grain of salt, knowing that, you know, whatever they said that they've worked through or said that they've battled, is probably something that they may still currently be dealing with.
Gotcha. That's very helpful. So, I know that you said that this has definitely impacted your life. Can you maybe talk about some positive things that might have come from your life? Not that his death was positive, but just things internally that may have helped you grow, or, you know.
Yeah, so I could go on and on about the ways that this has negatively impacted me, and even to say the words positively impacted just sounds wrong.
Right.
But just ways that I've, I guess, become more mature in who I am. And so different ways where I feel like I've become a lot more mature after being through something like this is I understand more about myself and others. And that is like so much more. I understand more about how I respond in situations, whether that be like how I deal with my emotions. Like, I know so much more about how I just want to compress my emotions. I don't want to talk with people about it. I don't want to, you know, bring it up or just go have conversations with people about it. I just want to push it down and not really talk about things. And so that's one thing that I know more about myself. Another thing is just like,
so now that you say you recognize that you just like to stuff things down and not really have the conversation or confront the situation, like, do you force yourself to kind of combat that and like push through and have the conversation, or like what has that awareness brought?
Yeah, so self-awareness is everything. And so if you're watching this, I want you to think about your personality and think through the ways that you would respond in different scenarios where a lot has been put on you, or you're dealing with stress. Like, how do you respond in those situations? And so for me, I'm somebody that's going to just push it down, who's not going to just open up to everybody all of a sudden, just call somebody up and just have a 4-hour conversation about like everything that I'm struggling with. I'm much more likely just to push it down and not, you know, bring it up to somebody. So knowing that, there's a couple things that I do. First of all, I don't think it's wrong for people to have their different personalities and coping mechanisms necessarily. Like, it's okay to process things internally, and it's okay to process things externally. And
so
sometimes
it's okay
people
to be
people process things externally and they don't really process it internally first, and then that could get them in trouble, you know, with somebody on the other end. But at the same time, if you only do one or the other, like, it's not going to be healthy for you. And so if I only push things down, if I only, you know, seclude myself or push others away, like, that's not going to be good. And so I know I have the self-awareness now that if I'm having a lot of stress, I need to call somebody up. And more than just somebody, I know 3 or 4 people that I can call right now that I could have conversations about anything with, and I can talk about that kind of stuff. And for those of you listening, that might come as discouraging, because you might not say that you have 3 or 4 people that you feel like you can call. And you might feel like there's nobody that you can talk to. And in that case, I would again just encourage you, first of all, that there is a God who you can talk to, who is always listening. And more than anything, God understands where you're at. And in Ephesians 1, it talks about how God understands and God knows what it's like. And through Jesus living in human flesh, we know that that's true because he's experienced it. And I'm just encouraged to know that there's a God who hears us, who understands, who we can go to. And on top of that, I'll also say, and, you know, take this however you want.
Whether you believe in God or not.
Yeah.
He believes in you. He knows you. He sees you. He hears you, and he loves you.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I am biased because I am a pastor, so you can take this at whatever you think it's worth. But I'll also say the best forms of community that I've found have been in church and in small groups. And, you know, that may be a coincidence. That may just be my story. But I've seen it over and over again. The relationships that are built in a faith-based setting are just incredible. And I think a big piece of that is because when you start talking about things like faith and spirituality, it's very, like, it's hard to separate those from your experiences and the things that you've been through and your emotions and your past and different things that you've worked through. And so as you kind of talk about those things with people, you're almost forced to, like, kind of review the way that your whole life in general. And so the relationships that get built in a faith setting can, are largely like all of the people that I would call in any sort of those instances are people that I am also walking alongside in my faith. And so
That's good.
I would just encourage you, whether you are a Christian or not a Christian, and you want to find some sort of community, then I would encourage you to visit a church, get connected in a young adult ministry. I'm assuming your audience is mostly going to be younger adults or people maybe in their 20s and 30s. And so get connected.
At this point?
Yeah, so
you can definitely reach out here as well.
Yeah.
If you have a hard time getting connected anywhere or don't know where to start, reach out and I can give you some pointers. So back to some of the things that have kind of like not positive, but helped you grow and mature, and is there anything that like has even impacted like the direction of your life?
Yeah, so as I said in the beginning, I'm a student pastor, and I think a large part of why I want to be in student ministry is because of this experience that I've had. And I know that as I work primarily with people from the ages of 10 to 18, and in those 8 years, a lot changes and a lot goes on, and there's a lot of it's kind of when you begin to figure out who you are as an individual. You begin to figure out like yourself, and it's an exciting time. And I have just kind of fallen in love with that age group and being a part of students' lives. And there's a famous statistic amongst youth pastors that goes around saying that in order for somebody to thrive in their faith, they need 5 adults pouring into them. And so most people who are at a solid place in their faith can look back and point to 5 adults who are pouring into them during their adolescence, during their teenage years. And so I know that's true for me. And so it's exciting for me just to be able to be one of those 5 for the students that I get to lead. And so knowing now too that just I get to be a part of the hope and the healing, and to know that there are students out there who I know from a fact, even just from my ministry, but also all across the world, who are battling with all kinds of issues. And so to be able to be a piece of the hope and healing, to be able to be a piece of the solution, is just a rewarding thing for me. And so having that experience that I had when I was in high school, I am more passionate and equipped in a lot of ways to be able to just love students well, and lead them.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you feel like somebody should know, or any other piece of the story that you find just very pivotal or important?
I would say, like, this is all just my story, and this, I don't know how much that I've said that either helps or it might have just been a waste of your time, but I hope that there has been something that you've kind of gravitated towards, and that you were to begin to process this more and just have a conversation with somebody. We're spending 20 minutes out of our day just having a conversation, and it's probably better than some sort of Netflix show or surfing on the internet for 20 minutes. And so there's a stigma around not talking about things that are real and talking about problems that people just, again, push to the side or push away. But it's just so much more valuable to talk about it. And if you're looking for something to listen to more, one of my favorite podcasts that I've ever listened to is the podcast by the title of "I'm Not Okay, But Jesus Is," and it's by I think it's by Louis Giglio. I think the podcast is like Passion City. Okay. But if you just type in "I'm Not Okay, But Jesus Is," that's the best podcast that I've listened to.
I'll look it up and add the link.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I don't think this was a waste of time, because there's so much power in sharing your testimony. So I truly appreciate you taking the time and sharing this with me and sharing it with everybody. And it's definitely impacted my life. So I'm sure that even if it only impacts one more person, like, you've made a difference. And that's all Jesus asked us to do, is to share our testimony and spread his name. So
well, thanks for having me on the channel, and thanks for tuning in.